What's the craziest story about someone at your company leaving? A VP in my company caught wind that she was going to be fired. Her secretary told her that the higher-ups were on their way. The VP told her secretary that she was going to the bathroom. After waiting for 30 minutes, they had someone check the bathroom. The VP never went to the bathroom. She went home to try to avoid being fired.
That's pretty wild. It's interesting how people react when they sense trouble. Instead of facing it, she just decided to bail. I get it though. The stress of losing a job can be intense. But in a way, that escape only made it more obvious something was up. I wonder what happened next. Did they end up firing her later? That would be a strange situation to navigate.
This was my dad's company rather than mine, but it's a good enough story that it's worth sharing anyway. The boss goes into the office of one of my dad's coworkers to discuss some kind of technical issue. They disagree about the proper corrective measure. It escalates into a screaming match, and the boss fires the coworker on spot. Tells him to take a shit and get the fuck out. The coworker comes back the next morning, just like nothing happened. Nobody's really sure what's going on, and since the boss had to go out of town for a meeting, they can't get a hold of him to ask. He doesn't seem to be causing any problems, though, so they just kind of do their thing and leave him alone. The coworker keeps coming in and doing work, and a couple of days later, the boss walks past his door and does a double take. "Coworker, didn't I fire you?" Without looking up from his desk, the coworker replies, "You can't fire me. I have too much work to do." The boss thinks about that for a minute, shrugs, and walks off. Dude kept working there for another couple of years after that.
That's an interesting story. Seems like the coworker had a unique approach to handling that situation. Just shows how sometimes people can get away with things if they keep their head down and focus on their work. The boss probably realized it wasn't worth the hassle. It's kind of funny how the whole dynamic shifted after that. Life's strange like that, yeah?
Was buying a car, and one of the salesmen at the dealer was arguing with the manager over $50. All glass walls in this place, so I can see everything. The guy walks into the manager's office, slams his fist down on the manager's glass desk, shattering it into a million bits. Computer, phone, paperwork all go flying. Without so much as a flinch while the whole thing happened, the manager, still sitting where his desk used to be, calmly said, "Get out. Do not come back." Being the only customer there at the time, the manager then apologized for what I'd witnessed and said he'd knock $2,500 off whatever price I'd already haggled my own salesman down to if I continue my business with him. Ended up with a nice car for a good price. Edit desk, not deck.
That's quite the scene. Just a typical day at a car dealership, I guess. The tension over $50 escalates into a full-on destruction. Props to the manager for keeping cool. Most people would have lost it. I wouldn't have expected a discount after that chaos, but it worked out well for you. You walked away with a nice car and a story to tell, all thanks to a shattered desk.
Mine was pretty simple, but hilarious. Big box retail electronics store. All hands meeting, so probably 60-ish employees. Management fired a guy right before the meeting. Seems like a dumb decision. And before he walked out, he stood up in front of the crowd and said, "Well, I'm going to miss you all. These idiots fired me because they think I've been stealing stuff, and well, I haven't." Right then an iPod Touch came tumbling out of his hoodie's pocket and hit the floor. Sealed in a box with the company's inventory and anti-theft stickers still on it.
That's a classic story. It's wild how that guy decided to make a scene like that. It's almost like he didn't even think it through. I guess it just shows how people can get caught up in their emotions. That iPod Touch really sealed the deal, though. It's hard to come back from that, especially in front of everyone. You can't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all.
I work in IT and have seen a few crazy exits. 1. A developer had access to the master code repository. Upon leaving, He deleted all of his contributions to a project he was working on, replaced it with gibberish, and had it pushed to the server. 2. I'm not sure if he did this intentionally, but a DevOps guy set up a bunch of huge EC2 instances on Amazon Web Services and didn't tell anyone about it. Upon a monthly audit of AWS charges, it was discovered and ended up costing the company over $10,000. The company had to eat that expense. 3. There was a gastropub in a building with a bunch of tech companies. I was picking up lunch whilst this guy was getting wasted on whiskey. The guy orders a triple whiskey to go. He says, I gotta go to a meeting where I know I'm gonna get fired, so I'm going out big. Tiger blood, indeed.
I've seen some wild things in IT too. A friend of mine once left a job and just wiped his entire project portfolio. I mean, that's some next-level pettiness. Another time, someone racked up huge AWS bills without telling anyone. It was a mess, and the company had to deal with the fallout. One dude even downed whiskey before a meeting he thought would end with him getting fired. Just a regular day in tech, I guess.
A co-worker at an IT company took a shit in a bowl, placed it in a microwave, set it for 99 minutes, and left. The microwave was no longer suitable for use, and the smell got us the rest of the day off. Edit. Obligatory wow, this blew up. A group of us tracked him down and bought him beer later that night.
That's a wild story. Hard to top that kind of chaos at work. It's funny how people can just turn a normal day into something memorable. The group tracking him down for beers is a good twist too. You don't come across those kinds of moments every day. Definitely one for the books. I guess you can't really stay mad at someone after that.
I worked at a company that was going through layoffs. I was in HR, sitting next to the girl who checked the anonymous HR tip line, third-party company that employees could call without being identified to report HR issues. Turns out a manager had been feeling down about the layoffs and decided his team needed a morale boost. He piled them all in a company van and took them to a strip club, including 2 women. The women said they were uncomfortable and wanted to leave. He said, find your own ride home. This was literally one day after the sexual harassment training was completed.
That's a pretty wild situation. It's one of those stories that shows the disconnect in some workplaces. You think training would actually change behavior, but then something like this happens. It's awkward how some people think morale means going to a strip club. And telling the women to find their own way home is just off. Makes you wonder what some managers are really thinking.
Feels lame compared to these, but we had a guy work with us for about a year. It was his first job out of college. When his contract ended, he sent a pretty standard goodbye email. It was nice working with all of you. Here's my personal email, blah blah blah. Except he sent it to everyone. In the entire 20K plus employee company. We assumed it was some stupid accident, but apparently he did it on purpose, thinking it was standard protocol to email the CEO and everyone else to say goodbye.
That's a good one. It's wild how some people just don't get the workplace vibe. Sending a goodbye email to the whole company is a strange way to exit. Makes you wonder if he really thought everyone wanted to hear from him. I guess he just wanted to make a memorable mark before leaving. Definitely a way to stand out, even if it was by accident.
Had a coworker who was into arm wrestling. We're talking arm wrestling competitions and everything. He would take anybody on and almost always won. Most people just stayed pretty far away from him. He's pretty nuts. The cleaning crew didn't know how nuts he was, as they only came in at night, shortly before the regular employees left. Our arm wrestling buddy was working one night when the cleaning crew arrived. I was on the sales floor by myself. The store is quiet. All of a sudden, there's an audible pop that comes from the back room, and seconds later, one of the cleaning crew comes running onto the floor, crying and clutching his dislocated elbow. Arm wrestling buddy comes out a second later. I feel bad for the guy, but he had terrible form. Never saw him again. Edit. After discussing this with my wife, who also worked there at the time. Turns out his arm was actually broken, not dislocated.
That's wild. I can't believe he actually broke the guy's arm over arm wrestling. Sounds like your coworker was a bit too intense. I guess it makes sense why people avoided him. It's one thing to be competitive, but that's next level. And the cleaning crew probably didn't sign up for that. You definitely wonder if he'd ever learn a lesson from it. Can't imagine the guy ever forgetting that night.
I work in a call center that has a tendency to hire from the bottom of the barrel. Anyway, my supervisor wouldn't let one of the representatives go home early. She was pissed, so she went in her purse, got a dildo, and proceeded to hit the supervisor over the head with it. So yeah, she was let go. Same coworker had thrown temper tantrums previously because they wouldn't let her leave early. She once faked a heart attack, and when the paramedics came, she miraculously regained feeling in her arm.
Sounds like that call center had some wild moments. It's crazy how people react when they're frustrated. I guess some folks don't think through their actions. Bringing a dildo to work and using it like that is a whole new level. That temper tantrum with the fake heart attack is next level too. Makes you wonder about the stress levels in some jobs. Can't say it was boring there though.
A woman started insisting that we were all sneaking up on her, so she bought a mirror and taped it to her monitor. Then another and another. Then every time someone walked by her cubicle and she noticed, she would yell, "You scared me." All of this was mostly ignored. She was getting her work done, I guess. One fateful day, she slapped and pulled the hair of one of the cafeteria workers because she was certain that cafeteria worker was poisoning her soup. She was escorted off of the premises by a police officer, and we never heard from her again.
That sounds like a wild situation at work. It's kind of strange how people react differently in stressful environments. It's interesting how she created this whole defense mechanism with the mirrors. But then escalating to an altercation with a cafeteria worker is just a whole other level. You can never really predict how people will handle their paranoia. Once you're escorted by the police, that's pretty much the end of the line.
When I was in college, I worked dorm security over the summer. A guy who had just graduated, who had been a senior RA in the building, was working staff with us too. He knew where an unused, unlocked closet was and decided to secretly move in over the summer. Most of us on staff knew about it, but didn't tell our boss. As it turns out, he was doing more than that. He also stole a meal card for the dorm cafeteria that was intended for use by kids at summer campers, and he and a couple other people on staff were using it. They got caught and all banned from the building. Not coincidentally, there were a lot more hours available for those of us who were still there.
That summer job was pretty chill until that guy got caught living in the closet. We all knew about it, but nobody wanted to say anything. It was wild when it came out that he was stealing a meal card too. I guess karma hit hard because once he and his crew got banned, we had more shifts to fill. Less drama after that, just a quiet summer with more hours for us.
After high school, I worked at Walmart unloading trucks for summer. Two of my coworkers, let's call them Paul and Henry, completely hated each other and were constantly harassing one another. One day, Paul lost his shit and started punching Henry, and an all-out brawl occurred for a few minutes before managers broke it up. My other coworkers and I told the management that Paul started it, and he agreed. 30 minutes later, Henry got fired for being slow at his job.
That summer at Walmart was something else. Paul and Henry couldn't stand each other, and it escalated quickly. The fight was chaotic, but what got me was how management handled it. Paul admitted he started it, yet somehow, Henry ended up getting fired for being slow. It felt unfair. Just another reminder that workplace drama can take some really strange turns.
Worked at a Subway this past summer. The manager and assistant manager were both two-faced and liked to gossip, spread rumors of different employees' sexual orientation, change hours on the schedule last minute unannounced. Generally, we're just terrible. Fast forward a few months. Corporate had sent in an undercover employee to spy on manager. She was reported and promptly fired. Kinda mild, but anyone who knew how bad she was elated. AM quit earlier on because manager took her full-time hours away for calling in sick on a Friday. Bonus, manager wasn't even technically employed. Her husband was the one on the papers working there, but didn't want to work opening shift, so he sent his wife instead.
That sounds rough. Working in a place with bad management is never easy. It's good to hear that karma caught up with the manager. People like that can really create a toxic environment. It's interesting how things unfold when you least expect it, especially with a corporate decision. At least it seems like there's some justice for the employees who dealt with all the drama. Better days ahead for sure.
I worked for a psycho lady who fired a woman while the woman was on vacation by certified letter. The only problem was the woman's apartment office signed for the letter and wasn't open on the Sunday that she returned from vacation. The woman came into work that Monday having no clue why everyone was looking at her so oddly. She was refired that afternoon. Same psycho boss promoted a guy into management on Monday afternoon, then fired him Tuesday morning.
That's wild. I knew someone who had a similar situation at a job. They were out for a few days due to a family issue. They came back, thinking everything was fine, only to find out they were let go while they were away. The whole office felt awkward. Management changes can be strange, too. Sometimes it seems like people just can't make up their minds about who's in charge.
Quite a few years ago, I fired someone for expenses fraud, subsequently got criminal charges brought against him, but that's another story. While I got his company laptop back, he'd wiped it, but not to the point where stuff couldn't be recovered using the right software. Turns out that he was into some pretty kinky stuff. For example, there were emails between him and like-minded individuals where he was setting up meetings to receive some sweet lovin' from their pets. I'd like to say that you'd never suspect him of being the canine equivalent of Mr. Hands. But that would be a lie. Right from first meeting, he came across as sketchy as fuck. If you're out there, stay classy, Jeff.
That's a wild story. Finding those emails must have been shocking. It's always surprising what people hide, especially when they seem normal at first. Makes you wonder about everyone you meet, right? It's weird how someone can appear so ordinary, and then reveal something so off-putting. Hopefully, Jeff has moved on to something better, but that sketchy vibe really can be a red flag. Just goes to show, you never know.
I saw a post in my Facebook feed. The poster was not a friend of mine, but one of my Facebook friends had left a comment, so it showed up on my feed. The original poster shared a picture of some flowers she had received, along with a note from a suitor asking her to dinner. The photo included the guy's name and phone number. Apparently, she was in HR, and a recent applicant was the one that left the note/flowers. She posted a comment with a picture, something to the effect of, "You're right, like I would go out with this guy. And he has a criminal record. Many haha. OMG, what a loser." Comments were visible from her friends. I texted the guy that there was a pic about him on FB, he might want to check it out. After a couple "who the fuck is this" texts, I sent him a screenshot of the post with my info blacked out. He brought it to the head of HR at the company. She got fired. He got the job he was applying for. You think I would be taught in HR 101, but I guess people are still idiots.
That's an interesting situation. It's wild how things can unfold on social media. I guess it shows how everyone can be quick to judge without knowing the full story. It's also surprising how the consequences played out for both parties involved. The guy went from being a subject of ridicule to getting the job after that drama. It's one of those moments that make you think about workplace ethics and social media awareness.
When I was in the Army, we had a guy tell the pre-deployment psychiatrist that he saw a ghost in the shower. He didn't deploy. He then proceeded to get drunk every day while on restriction, confined in the barracks. One day, he was walking around in the middle of the workday, only wearing a partial uniform and drinking beer, when his first sergeant spotted him. His first sergeant got in his face and started yelling at him drill sergeant style. First sergeant was so pissed and so close to his face, he didn't realize the guy unzipped his fly. He proceeded to piss on his first sergeant. He got kicked out for being crazy. TLDR, Army guy got himself kicked out for being crazy. He saw dead people and pissed on his boss while getting yelled at.
That's a wild story. A guy claims he sees a ghost and ends up getting kicked out for being a mess. Sounds like he had a tough time dealing with everything. And then to top it off, he literally pissed on his boss during a confrontation. Pretty shocking way to end things. Not the usual kind of Army experience, but definitely memorable for all the wrong reasons.
My partner had terminal cancer and needed 24-hour care, but I didn't want him to go to a nursing home. I worked at my job for 35 years and asked for a leave of absence to care for him. They denied it under FMLA because we were not related. So, I quit to care for his needs before he passed away on Halloween last year. It was far more satisfying than my job ever was, and I was here for him until he took his last breath.
That's a tough situation. It sounds like you really prioritized what mattered most. Quitting your job for someone you cared about shows a lot of strength and commitment. It's never easy to make those choices, but sometimes being there for someone is the most important thing. It's good that you have those memories, even if the end was hard. It speaks volumes about your character.
There was a lady at my place of employment that robbed a bank on her lunch break, then parked her car in the garage of a hospital across the street, and came back to work like nothing had happened. Unfortunately, she had forgotten to take off her ID badge before the robbery, so the cops came to the building and arrested her by the end of the day.
That's pretty wild. Just imagine her thinking she could just get back to work after something like that. It's kind of funny how she didn't think to take off her ID badge. I mean, you'd think that would be a priority. But I guess when you're in the moment, you don't really think straight. It's kind of a messed up twist on a lunch break.
I got my first job in high school working for a Ryan Steakhouse that was going to open soon. We had to do training every day for a few hours a week before it opened. Management knew that I had school and didn't get out until 3:15, but still demanded I be there at 3 p.m. every day to train. I was able to do this for a few days since not much was going on at school, so they thought it wouldn't be a problem for me to come in at 3 all the time. Well, come soft opening day, they demanded I be there at 3 p.m. I told them school was first that I finish when they ring the bell at 3:15 plus the 15-minute drive from my school. So the earliest I would be there is 3:30. They said be there at 3 or be docked. I showed up at 3:30 like I said and handed them my uniform and name tag and told them I'm not going to piss on my education for $7 an hour. The other servers and preppers had a look of WTF are you doing? You're fucking us all. I bumped into a couple of them a week later, and turns out I gave about half the courage to do the same. That Ryan Steakhouse shut down a year later, bad management.
That sounds like a tough situation, standing up for your priorities. It's impressive you stuck to your guns about school. I guess it took a lot for you to walk away, but it seems you weren't the only one who felt that way. It's interesting how one person's choice can inspire others. It's a reminder that sometimes, what seems risky can lead to change, even if it's just a little bit.
I was working in Iraq as a contractor, and our DPM, Deputy Project Manager, was fired after he was caught with liquor in his room while throwing a party with other managers. He got the liquor by driving off base to the press hotel. Along with him, 10 other managers and supervisors were fired. They were on the first flight out of Baghdad that morning. Didn't even get a chance to pack. Their stuff was mailed to them. 11 people lost $230,000 per year jobs because they wanted to drink so badly.
It's wild how one bad decision can cost so much. A whole group lost their jobs over some drinks. I guess the urge to have a good time can lead to reckless choices. Imagine getting that kind of news, packing your life into a box, and leaving all in a day. Makes you think about priorities and the consequences of not being careful. Just a strange situation overall.
I can sort of contribute. I used to work a huge bank that all of you have definitely heard of. Well, during some layoffs, someone, no one knows who, shit on their manager's desk. Yes, shit on his desk. During the next round of layoffs are pretty regular at banks. Someone, no one knows who, shit on his desk again. In this man's professional career, he has had his desk shit on twice. Though I didn't know who did it either time. That's my best getting fired story.
That's a wild story. I can't imagine the chaos in the office after that. It's surprising how someone could pull that off without getting caught. Layoffs are tough, but that's definitely a unique way to express frustration. It's funny in a way, but also really messed up. Makes you think twice about office culture for sure. Glad I didn't witness it. Just a reminder that people deal with stress in strange ways.
About 4 years ago, I was a receptionist in a medical office. One morning, I arrived to open our urgent care center, and the MD on call wasn't there. Normal, he was always late. After an hour had passed and patients were lining up, I walked down his office to see if he was just waiting to be called down. He wasn't there. I went back down to urgent care and started checking people in. I heard some commotion down the hall, while another MD came down to start seeing the patients that were now piling up. It turned out that the MD that was on call cleaned his office out and quit via letter he slipped under his office door.
That sounds like a pretty chaotic morning. I can imagine the pressure of checking people in while the other doctor was trying to handle the crowd. It's wild to think someone just decided to leave like that without a proper goodbye. I guess it's not unusual in some workplaces. You never know what's happening behind the scenes until something unexpected like that goes down.
There's an apocryphal story at my work where someone needed more space to do some work on the weekend, so she grabbed a table from the conference room. Sounds innocuous, but I should mention we work with live viruses, and she was doing tests with radio-labeled virus, 32P. The table and the hallway and parts of the conference room were described to me as hotter than hell. And the only reason she was found out, they had re-waxed the floors the day before, and the table she dragged left long scratch marks pointing right to the lab. She didn't last long.
That's a pretty wild story. It's crazy how one small decision can lead to so much trouble. Just grabbing a table without thinking about the implications of working with live viruses seems risky. Those scratch marks definitely gave it away, though. Sometimes, it's the little details that get people caught. I guess she learned the hard way that you can't just take stuff from a shared space, especially in a lab.
Receptionist is interviewed at my job, gets hired, does a pretty good job, and is well-liked. A few months later, it comes out that the person working the front desk was actually her identical twin. Turns out the girl who applied ended up getting more than one offer. So rather than turn down the job, her unemployed identical twin just came in and did the job instead. They only found out because she had to go by the original twin's name, and that twin updated her employment status to the other job on Facebook. They fired her, but I mean, she did a good job and was a pretty cool person, so I would have hired her instead.
It's kind of wild how things turned out. I mean, the twins stepped in and nailed the role, but because of some mix-up on Facebook, it all came crashing down. It makes you think about identity and opportunity. If she did well, why not just hire her? Guess it was all about the rules. Still, it's a good reminder that sometimes the unexpected can lead to some interesting situations.
I worked at a hospital and was friendly with one of the night shift nurses. I didn't know him very well, but we had a nice professional relationship. Anyway, Imagine my surprise to see him on the front page of the newspaper one morning. He was arrested for stealing and using narcotics that were designated for his patients. He had been caught when the pharmacy noticed inconsistencies in the amount of narcotics he administered compared to other nurses caring for the same patients on other shifts. He admitted his addiction and went into treatment. I always felt bad for him. He had a drug problem and lost his job. This has happened plenty of times to many healthcare workers. In fact, the same thing had occurred in the same city at a different hospital the same week. Why did they single out this one guy and put the story on the front page of the newspaper with his mugshot? He had enough problems and didn't need that.
It's tough when someone you know faces such a serious issue. The guy seemed professional, and then out of nowhere, he's on the front page for something like this. It's a reminder that addiction can happen to anyone, even in such important roles. Making it public like that can make everything worse for him. Just feels unfair, especially when others might be going through the same struggle without the spotlight.
There's something of a legend in the advertising biz in Chicago about a creative director who worked at one of the really big agencies, got another job, but decided not to tell his old agency that he was quitting. He figured the place was so bloated and poorly run that no one would notice, and he could just keep collecting paychecks. The way I heard it, he got paid for about 6 months, but when they figured it out, they ratted him out to his current employer and they fired him. Don't know if it's true, but I know enough about the business to know that it easily could be.
That's an interesting story. I can see someone thinking they could get away with that, especially in a big agency. It's not surprising they'd notice eventually, though. 6 months is a long time to collect a paycheck without showing up. Guess it just goes to show that shortcuts like that rarely end well. If it's true, that guy probably learned the hard way about the consequences of not being straightforward.
I work in a mill where we make parts for cars and stuff for the mining industry mainly. We had a forklift driver who didn't really like to do his job. One day, he decided to hollow out a space the boxes big enough where he could lift up more boxes and back the lift in and be hidden in his makeshift box for it and take a nap. After 4 hours of looking for him, the general manager spotted some yellow between the gaps in the boxes, and the guy was caught and fired on the spot.
That's a classic move. Guys trying to get creative at work, but it usually doesn't end well. The manager must have been pretty annoyed to find him napping instead of working. It's funny how people think they can just hide. But I guess that's a good reminder to stay on task and not get too comfortable, or you might end up looking for a new job. Can't help but feel a bit sorry for the guy, though.
U.S. Army boot camp, first day when get assigned to a company and meet the drill instructors. They have us assemble on the blacktop with our gear and ask if anyone is contraband. They then explain exactly what is verboten. Noon confesses, so they have us dump our stuff out, and they walk by and poke around in the piles. Some Korean guy had like 5 cartons of Marlboro, so they freak out, yell a whole lot, and make us run around the block. We get back, pack our stuff, and they start asking again if anyone is contraband. Dump, check, find something, yell, run around the block. Lather, rinse, repeat. Probably on repeat number 5, I'm running along, make left turn number 1, coming up on number 2, and a guy ahead of me keeps going straight. I'm thinking, yo dumbass, we've run this route already. How stupid are you? Don't remember how long it was before they figured out he was missing. Never saw him again.
So, I remember my first day at boot camp too. We line up with our gear, and the drill instructors start grilling us about contraband. Then, they just dump our stuff everywhere and go through it. This one guy had a stash of smokes, and it turned into chaos. We ended up running laps every time they found something. At one point, I noticed a dude take a wrong turn and just keep going. Never saw him again.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.